One of the biggest problems in comics as a medium, or at least the version we have today, is the status quo. Characters rarely stay changed for long, heroes die and come back, villains are reset, and even major events that realistically should have lasting consequences are often undone. Unlike other mediums such as anime, manga, comic book movies, or even games where consequences can stick and characters can actually evolve permanently, that isn't usually the case with comics. Though today I'm going to be posing and asking a different kind of question. After all of these years, decades even, could some of these sidekicks, successors, students finally step out of the shadows and overcome their mentors or people who have trained them? Or will the status quo just stay the same and there's no actual real character development going on? And I think there's a pretty good argument for each of the pairs that I'm going to list here in this video, though some obviously more clear-cut than others, but this first one here might be a little controversial because even some of the things in DC itself seems to go back and forth if this is truly the case. And of course I'm talking about Batman and Nightwing, Dick Grayson, the original architect of what we come to know as a superhero and their sidekick, Batman and Robin, and as such these characters obviously need no introduction. And so instead, let's just go head to head and see where their strengths and weaknesses lie against one another. And yes, I do want to say in preference that this is mainly on the topic of battling and versus fighting, because that's one most interesting into what people really want to see. But I will touch on how each of the sidekicks and students stack up to being actual heroes compared to their mentors and trainers. But starting over with Batman and Nightwing, honestly, this is a lot closer than people think it is. At this point, Nightwing is pretty much in his prime and has even surpassed Bruce in certain areas like speed, acrobats, among other stuff. Though purely physically speaking, Bruce is usually depicted as being stronger and tougher. And his actual combat prowess, meaning his martial arts skills, are a bit better as well, but not to an overwhelmingly amount or degree that it would be a stomp in his favor, because just the last time they fought in canon during the Gotham War storyline, after being on the run and being forced to turn against his allies, Batman not only fought Nightwing, but basically the full extended Bat family as well. And to be honest, I just can't see Nightwing taking the place of Batman here and also taking down Cassandra Cain, Red Hood, Stephanie Brown, Duke all at the same time just by himself. In the midst of the same fight though, Batman even makes note that Dick is not only fast but super difficult to tag, referring to what I said before about him having the speed advantage. Though Batman also does make note of his offensive abilities, his fighting skill and whatever have you, being pretty sloppy and not as good as him. Though regardless of any advantages or weaknesses they have, is again not to an extreme degree that they will be able to beat each other purely off that. Expanding upon this, in the next issue of the same storyline, Bruce and Dick have a direct one-on-one, and to no surprise, they're roughly equal. Sure, Bruce gets the upper hand a few times, but in the same fashion, so does Nightwing. And even if all of that wasn't enough to sway your mind, or you're still under the assumption that Bruce would just low diff Nightwing, if we move back over to the New 52, another time him and Batman fought, completely not holding back, going full force, which is also directly confirmed and stated by the writer of the story at the time. Once again, they are literally fighting on equal ground. And in the end, Nightwing won, though he didn't win because he beat Bruce into submission, but he did fight Batman to a standstill and proved his point and proved his worth. And lastly, another final mention, just to prove the point even further that Nightwing and Batman, Bruce and Dick are basically equals at this point, give or take. Maybe Nightwing even being superior, depending on how you look at it. Back in Dark Crisis issue number 2, we see a hurt Nightwing, Nightwing not even at his full capabilities, fight a fully intact Deathstroke. And after a short and bloody battle, Nightwing actually came out on top. Yes, I'm talking about the same Deathstroke in the past, who has pushed Batman to his limits, even beating the Dark Knight in certain situations. Now, Batman has also beaten Deathstroke, sure, but the point still stands that Deathstroke is a tough fight for Bruce, and Nightwing beat him here all the same. So, in my opinion, yes, I do think that this is way closer than a lot of people believe it is, but in the end, I would still have to give Bruce the slight edge in majority, especially if he is geared up and abuses his advantages, such as the strength, the better gear and gadgets, and his smarter strategic mind. Now, Spider-Man versus Spider-Man, Peter versus Miles, and for the record, I'm just going to be referring to the base versions of each characters because Miles currently has a spider deity on his side and quite literally in his head that could step in anytime to help if he wanted to. But aside from that, this is actually a really interesting one because if this was just a few years ago, this would be way more clear-cut and simple. The OG Spider-Man would win with moderate difficulty. Peter would beat Miles because he has way more experience, fighting skills, if you want to count the way of the spider that he has invented before, and whatever have you, and just generally fighting and holding his own against more skilled opponents, and overall just being physically stronger, more durable, faster, etc. The only thing Miles did have over Peter at this point was his more varied power set. In their first conflict and battle in the Spider-Man storyline showed this very fact. Peter was overall winning the fight until he got hit with Miles' Venom Blast, something at this point he didn't even know existed. But cut over to nowadays, all of this has changed and it's different. Because while yes, by actual shown and performed feats, Peter should be much stronger, tougher, faster, and whatever, and has performed well against more impressive people than Miles, but Miles has fought Peter a couple times, one being super recently, where they were treated as more or less equals in every aspect. In the Spectacular Spider-Man series issue number 5, both Peter and Miles think each other are robot clones of the original and want to take each other out, meaning they aren't holding back as much as they would. And even with this fact in mind, they were each able to still tank and dish out attacks, keep up speed-wise, and fight relatively equally to each other. But that's just in the area of their physicals. Now, when we talk about powers, Miles over the years has further evolved his own set, as in his Venom Blast. He can now create constructs, swords, weapons, even his own spider sense seemingly having an upgrade as well. Plus his invisibility, which could be helpful too. It's just, the only thing keeping Peter in this conversation is really his experience, and even that fact isn't that overwhelming of an advantage as it used to be, as Miles nowadays has taken on a bunch of different threats, people, been on teams, Avengers, whatever have you, where the experience gap is much closer, even though Peter is like, what, a decade or so older. Though with this fact in mind, I honestly would still give Peter the 0.5 advantage in a fight, meaning if they were to fight 10 times, I'd give Peter 5.5 and Miles 4.5, just because Peter has a long history of fighting against other spider people, even though Miles does have different powers. And realistically, if this were to be written today, I still just think Peter has the overall better package, if only very slightly, though Miles just has way more potential, if we're being real. Like, in a couple more years, he could probably outperform Peter, or just continuing to get stronger with his own more varied abilities. But that's just fight and versus wise. If you're talking about being an actual hero, honestly, I think Miles has maybe not surpassed Peter, but he definitely has become worthy of taking up the mantle of a Spider-Man, really being able to grow into the role, taking on his own area of New York, with also being an inspiration and hero, one that Peter himself even approves of. Now, when people talk about the Flash, it's usually one of two names. Either Barry Allen, the man who literally defined the mantle of being the Flash, or Wally West, the person or successor who surpassed it. Both mentor and protege, though also rivals for the same title, fastest man alive. And while I might be in the minority in this case nowadays anyway, when I think of the Flash, I think of Barry Allen. But as we're going to see and pit these two head to head, it's not really close at all. Because when it comes to speedsters, realistically, only one real metric matters in a versus battle anyway, and who would win, and it's literally speed. And with Wally West versus Barry Allen, like, it's not even a question or contest. We know directly that Wally is faster. Even there's an entire storyline in the Flash War 2018 where we've seen this fact firsthand. Wally straight up outran Barry, not in any metaphorical sense or potential to do so. No, he literally straight up did. Breaking time barriers, cracking open the Speed Force itself. Barry even admitted in quoting, "I can't catch him." And Wally in the years after that has just continued to become stronger, get new feats, and overall just become the definitive speedster, doing things like restoring entire timelines, reaching in and out of the Speed Force. Heck, he even outran the Speed Force itself, which is contradictory in and of itself, because how do you outrun your own power source that empowers you? And if you are outrunning it, then where are you getting that speed from? But you know, he has done it on page and canonically. So it's not even a question of who's faster and who would win, and it's outright Wally, but it is more interesting to talk about, has Wally surpassed Barry as a hero? And even as it pains me to say, because, you know, Barry is my Flash anyway, honestly, yeah, I believe Wally has surpassed him. Because for years in the real world, Barry was dead, gone, sacrificed himself, leaving Wally West as the main Flash. And because of such, he has grown into the role of being the Flash in the mantle and matching or even surpassing everything Barry has done. Now, that isn't to say that Barry is useless or doesn't have his place, as he does have his very clear-cut corner inside of the DC universe, but in the metrics we were going over in this video, yes, Wally has surpassed and even beats him power scaling-wise fairly easily, up to this point anyway. Continuing on with the theme of this video, we come to the Captain America portion. Steve Rogers versus Sam Wilson. Now, honestly, this one is a lot closer than people think. Like, sure, Steve Rogers, the original Captain America, the super soldier, peak human, decades of experience, by all metrics should be able to just stomp Sam Wilson, who has no super soldier serum, who is not superhuman, and is not even that good of a fighter compared to Steve anyway. But from what we have seen as Sam as Captain America, yeah, it's a little closer than you might think. Physically though, yes, Steve is obviously stronger. That's just fact. You know, he can bench press 1,000+ pounds, fought for days without rest, and his durability and willingness to just keep going is crazy. Fighting and taking down people he realistically has no business doing against. But the thing is, Sam has never tried to be Steve. He fights completely different, using more tech and gear to overcome the physical distance that he has with other superhumans in the same universe. Now, I wouldn't say Sam Wilson is more strategic in the way that he plans and fights, but with his better gear, you can't really be stupid and be a high-level Captain America yourself, using even more advantages than the original had. Flight, acrobatics, even having Red Wing and other abilities like that. So yeah, in a straight-up slugfest, Steve's got it, no question. He's more durable, he's more experienced in hand-to-hand combat, and overall just hits harder. But in terms of maybe even speed, mobility, and creativity, Sam Wilson, Captain America, with his greater gear and more varied means of attack, he has a very unique edge in that sense because he uses the environment. It comes at you at angles that Steve is just not used to dealing with. Though even just looking back at their training history, Steve has personally trained Sam when he was still Falcon. So while he isn't, say, all the way there, top tier hand-to-hand combat like Steve might be, he is not too far out and even has some decent feats of his own. Fighting Black Panther for one. Even heck, he even fought Steve on equal footing before. Though the situation there was skewed and the plotline had to move forward, but he wasn't completely stomped and taken out like you might have believed before. Which means it all comes down to who could just control the fight's range. If Wilson keeps moving, staying airborne, and forcing Steve to fight upward or adapt, then come on, realistically, Steve Rogers is going to have a hard time tagging him. But if he is able to close the gap and get in close and into a grounded close quarters battle, Steve takes it all day. So yes, if we're talking straight up combat, I believe Steve does take it, but it's not going to be easy and he still could very well lose in a lot of situations. But overall, due to the serum and other stuff, he is just a stronger, tougher, more battle hardened version of Captain America. But when it comes to them individually being heroes, I don't know if I would say Sam Wilson surpassed Captain America, but I feel like they fill two different roles. Steve Rogers is still the symbol, the icon that is Captain America and represents what America should be at the top, the ideals, etc. Whereas Sam Wilson, on the other hand, takes a different angle to being Captain America, as in where he is more of the on-the-ground, flawed, relatable Captain America in that sense, and a lot of times fights an uphill battle hero-wise than Steve had to. But with him leading the Avengers and other teams and other superheroes at this point, he's no slouch either in the hero department. At the start, I said one of the biggest problems in comics is the status quo and how things rarely stay changed for long. No matter how much these characters grow and change, the universe always seems to reset. But every now and again, someone does break through that cycle. Nightwing becoming the man and hero Bruce always hoped he'd be. Wally West outrunning Barry and literally defining what the Speed Force is. Miles standing shoulder to shoulder with Peter. Even Sam Wilson carrying the shield and mantle of Captain America with the same weight Steve did. But do you agree with the matchups and outcomes here? Do you think I'm wrong? Do you think some people are better than others? Let me know all in the comments down below. But as always, this was AJ here at the Hero Informer, and thank you for watching.